Hello, in this presentation we're going to work a problem related to a job cost system. So remember, in a job cost system we will be working with the production of inventory, and it's usually going to be production of inventory that is not the same in nature. So when we produce things, we often use a process cost system or a job cost system. We would generally use a job cost system when the things that we produce are not the same in nature. And also, unlike a merchandising company where we're just going to buy stuff and then we sell stuff, in the manufacturing company, what's happening is that we are creating the stuff. So we're actually making the stuff, the inventory being the stuff. So we're buying the raw material, we're processing that raw material, then we have the finished good, then we sell the finished good. So we need to track that process as we go. We're assuming that these items are not the same in nature. Sometimes we can think about like a construction company doing jobs. If we're tiling kitchens and whatnot, we might tile one kitchen that's a lot larger than the other kitchen, and therefore we have this problem of how do we allocate things to the jobs, such as overhead, when the jobs are different sizes. So those are the types of things we're going to talk about, and we are going to use this information. We're going to post journal entries into the blue area here. We're going to then, we're going to record the journal entries in the blue area. Then we'll post the journal entries to the general ledger over here. So here's the general ledger. It has every account that we will be using, starting with cash, assets in green, and then the liabilities and the equity accounts. And over here in the income and the expenses, we will then, once we post everything to the general ledger, then it will automatically populate the trial balance over here. So for example, this number is coming from that number on the general ledger, and that is the case all the way through here. So we'll be able to see what is happening as we go through this problem. And note that the new thing is that we are also going to have to track this number, the work in process, not just by the general ledger, which will be right here. That ties out, that's the same number. The general ledger is by date, but we also want to track it by job. So you can compare that similar to the accounts receivable account. The accounts receivable account, we have 180,000 in it. If we look at the activity in the general ledger, we can see the activity by date. But in that account, we also want to track it by who owes us money. So we want to list that 180 by client. Well, the similar kind of notion is going to be by the work in process. Work in process represents what is going on, or what is in process at this given point in time in terms of inventory, where we have these inventory accounts, raw materials. That's what we paid for it, so that it kind of is what it is. The work in process is what we're working on, and then we're going to transfer that to finished goods. So we're going to have to back up this work in process. If we go over here, that's all the way over here in our job cost system. So our job cost system is backing that up by job. So we have these three jobs. They're not the same. You can think of them as like a construction company where we're working on a job, or we are creating something, making inventory. We've got job 14, job 15, job 16, and if we add the totals up, the 41, the 42, and the 0, they add up to this 83, as we can see here, and that ties out, of course, to the 83 that we just saw on the general ledger and the trial balance. Now, when we think about us creating inventory, we got to get in our heads that the inventory that we're making, what we're creating, it consists of the raw materials, whatever we're using to put into the inventory. That's the most obvious piece of the ending product. But remember that it also includes direct labor. So obviously, for many types of things we make, the largest piece of it is oftentimes the labor. So how much does it cost for the labor? That's basically salary. So notice now we're not going to expense the salary for direct labor when the employees are working. We're going to put that into the cost of the inventory and expense it when we sell the inventory. And then factory overhead is anything that we cannot apply to the job. So the problem with factory overhead is that we do not know which job you apply it to, because either it's too small for us to take the time to apply it, or it's something that's indirect, such as the rent on the warehouse or something like that. Therefore, we're going to have to find some way to apply it to the job, and we'll talk about how we're going to handle that as we go. So just keep in mind, whenever we're making something, if we're producing something, whether it be a job cost or a process cost, we're going to have three factors in production that are included in the inventory. That's going to be direct materials, direct labor, and overhead. And we're also going to have basically three inventory accounts to deal with. That's going to be raw materials, work in process, finished goods. And then we're obviously going to sell it from that point, and then that's when we expense it in the form of cost of goods sold. All right, so first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to hide a few of these cells because I want to work with just part of the cells and have everything as close together as possible. So I'm going to hide cells G to K. So I'm going to put my cursor on G, so you see the drop down, left click, highlight over to K, which is that little skinny one, let go, and then right click on the selected area and hide that information. Alright, so now we have what we're going to do here. We're going to post it into this area, and then we're going to have to record it over here on the general ledger. Alright, so we're going to start off on 1-1 where we purchased raw materials on account. So I'm going to go through our series of questions as we go through this. This is going to be a fairly basic start off. There's nothing too unusual on this one. We're going to say, is cash affected? No, we didn't buy it with cash. We bought it on account. So we bought it basically with credit. So that's going to be the payable account. We may want to think about what we received, however, first in order to decide whether we should debit or credit the payable. So what did we buy? Raw materials. So if we look through here, we can see raw materials is up here. It's an asset. It's kind of basically part of inventory. So we're basically buying the raw materials that we are going to use to make our inventory. It's an asset. It has a debit balance. We got more of it. Therefore, we're going to make it go up by doing the same thing to it as what it is, which is another debit. So I'm going to debit this account. I'm going to right click on it, copy it. I'm going to put it in C4, right click, and paste 1, 2, 3, just the values. We're going to debit the raw materials. We're going to put the debits on top, of course. We're going to debit it for 400,000. If we debit something, we're also going to have to credit something, and that credit will, of course, be the accounts payable. I'm going to represent credits with a negative 400,000 for this worksheet. So it's in this case, it's in a credit column. However, it's also represented with a negative number. So keep that in mind. That's going to go to the accounts payable. We can see that the accounts payable has a credit balance. Does it make sense that we are crediting it? Well, accounts payable has a credit balance. We need to make it go up because we owe more money. Therefore, we're going to do the same thing to it as what it is, which in this case is another credit. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to put that in C5, right click, and paste it 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now I'm going to post this to the general ledger. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller to do that. I'm going to put the minimize button, bring it down to around 80, and then scroll over here so we can see the accounts payable at the same time. So remember, the general ledger, this is called posting, is in the same order, meaning we have assets in green and then the liabilities. We only have this liability over here being the one liability. So if we're going to post raw materials is here. Raw materials is the third account on the trial balance. Raw materials is the third account on the general ledger. We are in the debit column, so I'm going to be on the debit side of the raw materials in Q23. I'm going to post it with formula, so I'm going to say equals and point to that 400,000. That should bring this number up when we hit enter, and it should also affect the trial balance. So here's the 550, here's the 550, we're out of balance by the 400. Now I'm going to post the accounts payable. So here's the accounts payable here. It's our first orange account and only orange account because it's a liability. Therefore, it's going to be over here on the general ledger. We're going to post it in the credit side because it says credit. We're just going to say equals and then point to that 400,000 and enter. So that brings our balance to 445, puts us back in balance like so. All right, let's take a look at the next transaction. I'm going to scroll back over here. Going to make it a little bit larger again, back up to 100%. And we are now on 1.7, which says direct materials transferred from raw materials to a job. So now we're going to transfer that raw material to a job. So we're basically saying, hey, the job is requisitioning this raw material. Raw materials is now going from the stock house, whatever in the corner or the warehouse, to particular jobs. So the jobs here, we're going to allocate it to these 3 jobs based on this information, and therefore, what will the journal entry be? Well, we know raw materials is affected. It's going from raw materials, in this case, to the work in process. So, and why is it going to the work in process? Because anytime we affect a job, the jobs mean work in process. That the jobs are work in process. So we're going to post it to work in process in the journal entry. Then we're going to back it up in this format with the job sheets. So we know that the raw materials is going down because we are now moving it out of raw materials. Raw materials has a debit balance. We need to make it go down, so we're going to do the opposite thing to it, which in this case would be a credit. So I'm going to copy raw materials. We're going to put that on the bottom because credits go on the bottom. So here's the date. I'm putting it on the bottom, right clicking, pasting 1, 2, 3. I'm going to put it in the credit column. And we've got 3 numbers here. So I'm going to add those up. I'm going to say negative and then add them up. I'm going to put brackets around it and put 100,000 plus 170,000 plus 80,000 brackets and enter. So it's 350. Now, why do I put brackets around it like this? You can see in the formula bar that it's up here. Obviously, if I want to add them up and then flip the sign to make it a negative number, and if I just put a negative before the 100,000, then it would be a negative 100 plus the 170, and we'd come up with a negative number. So what we're going to tell it to do in order of operations is add up these 3 numbers, brackets, and then take that sum and make it and flip the sign on it. Basically what we're doing there. So we're going to have to do the same thing. If we credit something for 350, we're obviously going to have to debit something for 350. So I'm going to say negative of this number. I want the debit. I want that number, but flip the sign. And that number will, of course, go to the work in process. So we're moving it from raw materials to the stuff we're working on. Work in process has a debit balance. We're going to make it go up by doing the same thing to it, which is another debit. So I'm going to copy that. We're going to put that on top in C7, right click and paste 1, 2, 3. All right, I'm going to bring it back down to 80% down here. We're going to scroll back over on this side and we're going to post the work in process. So here's the work in process and here's the work in process. It's the 4th account. So we're going to scroll over here to work in process 4th account on the general ledger. This is called posting and we are in U9. So in U9, we're going to select equal and point to the 350 over here. That's going to bring the 83 up in the debit direction to 433, which we can also see on the trial balance. We're out of balance, of course, now by the 350. Now we're going to post the raw material. Here it is here. We're going to post it here. So it's the 3rd account. So here's raw materials down here. We are in the credit section this time because we're going to bring raw materials down. We are in R24 equals the 350. Therefore, the 550 is going to go down to 200. We can see that 200 here. We're back in balance here. Now, we've affected the work in process. Now, whenever something happens to the work in process, we want to break that out by job as well. So we're also going to have to break this out by job. So we'll scroll over here to the job sheet. So here's the job sheet over here. Remember, we have our 3 jobs. And the data then said that we broke this out in terms of the 3 jobs on 1/7. We are in the direct materials column and we transferred 100,000 of that 350 to job 14. And that's going to bring our total up. So notice we have what was in there before in terms of direct materials, the direct labor overhead, plus the 100 brings us to 144 total. Then we're going to do the same thing for job 15 on 1/7. We transferred in materials of 170,000. So that's going to bring our balance up, our total materials, total direct labor and overhead. We're now at 212. And then for job 16, we have on 1/7, what was transferred in was 80,000. So now if we sum those up, they add up to the 433, which ties out to what was on our work in process in the general ledger and the trial balance. And if I click on this and I hold down Control, I can click here and here, highlight those 3 cells and see that it also sums up to that 350. So the 350 was the journal entry. The 433 is the total of our jobs now. That total will also be seen on the work in process account here in the general ledger. It will also be seen on the trial balance here in work in process. All right, let's move to the next transaction here. We're going to bring it back up to 100%. Scrolling up, moving over, we are going to skip a line. We're now on 112. So now we have direct labor paid. So this is going to be direct labor on the job again. So now the thing with direct labor, well, what's the first thing? Is cash affected? Is cash affected? We're going to say yes in this case. And in this case, we're going to assume that we're paying cash. We're going to simplify the payroll process because we're going to focus in on the work in process. So we're going to assume we paid cash here. So cash has a debit balance. We're going to make it go down because we paid cash to the employees. Therefore, we're going to do the opposite thing to it as what it is. That's a debit. We're going to credit it to make it go down. So I'm going to copy cash. I'm going to put it on the bottom of the date, right click and paste it, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add them up. So in order to add them up and flip the sign, make it a negative number, I'm going to say negative of brackets, the 30,000 plus